There was a time when their worlds revolved around each other. Back in college, Sarah and Daniel were inseparable, two souls who found comfort in each other's presence. They shared dreams under starlit skies, laughed at the simplest of things, and made promises of a future together. To them, love wasn't just a feeling, it was the very air they breathed. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Sarah came from a family that believed in stability and tradition. Her father wanted her to focus on her career, not on what he called childish infatuations. Daniel, on the other hand, carried the burden of responsibility on his shoulders. With his father's sudden passing, he became the pillar of support for his family, forced to take on jobs that left him exhausted and distant. Slowly, the cracks began to show. Misunderstandings crept in, and words once sweet turned sharp. Promises made in the glow of youth began to feel impossible in the harsh light of reality. Neither of them wanted to let go, but the world around them pushed them apart. One evening, after yet another argument about their uncertain future, Daniel walked her home in silence. At her doorstep, he finally whispered, "Maybe love isn't enough right now." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, knowing deep down he was right. That night, they let go not because they stopped loving each other, but because they thought it was the only way to survive. Years passed. They went their separate ways, carrying the unspoken ache of what could have been. Sarah buried herself in her work, becoming the ambitious professional her family always wanted her to be. Daniel worked tirelessly to support his family, sacrificing his own dreams along the way. And though their lives moved forward, neither of them truly healed from the absence of the other. The past they left behind was not just a story of lost love, it was a story of unfinished love. Time became the silent witness of their separation. Days turned into months, and months into years. Sarah and Daniel walked different roads, yet both carried invisible scars from a love that once defined them. Sarah threw herself into her career with relentless determination. She rose through the ranks in a corporate firm, admired by her colleagues for her intelligence and confidence. On the outside, she seemed to have it all: success, respect, and independence. But behind her polished smile was a quiet emptiness. She had friendships and fleeting relationships, but none ever filled the void Daniel had left behind. At night, when she returned to her empty apartment, she often found herself staring at old photos hidden in a drawer, wondering if he ever thought of her too. Daniel's life followed a different path. He never had the luxury of chasing ambitions for himself. With his family depending on him, he took whatever work he could find, sometimes at construction sites, sometimes behind the wheel of a delivery truck. His hands grew calloused, his back weary, but his heart remained the same, kind, selfless, and quietly wounded. Friends often teased him about staying single, but he brushed it off with a smile, hiding the truth. He had loved once, deeply, and no one else had ever come close. Though miles and circumstances separated them, their hearts seemed to beat in quiet sync. There were moments on a late-night walk for Daniel, or in the middle of Sarah's long flights, when both would suddenly pause, gripped by a strange longing they couldn't explain. It was as if some invisible thread still connected them, fragile yet unbroken. Years of silence didn't erase the memories. Instead, they became part of who they were. Sarah learned strength, but she missed the softness of Daniel's laughter. Daniel learned sacrifice, but he missed the way Sarah believed in his dreams. Life without each other was not unbearable, it was simply incomplete. Neither of them knew that fate, patient and quiet, was already working in the background. Their paths, once diverged, were slowly finding a way back to one another. It happened on an ordinary day, the kind neither of them could have predicted. Sarah had been invited to speak at a charity event organized in her hometown, a place she hadn't visited in years. She hesitated at first, but something inside her told her to go. Dressed in her usual grace and confidence, she walked into the crowded hall, unaware that her past was waiting for her there. Daniel was at the same event, though for very different reasons. He wasn't there as a guest of honor, but as part of the volunteer team helping with logistics. He had been working with the charity on weekends, quietly giving his time to help others in need. For him, it wasn't about recognition, it was about purpose. When Sarah stepped onto the stage to deliver her speech, Daniel was busy arranging chairs at the back. But then he heard her voice, calm, steady, familiar. A voice he hadn't heard in years, yet one he could never forget. His hands froze, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, and there she was. Sarah, too, felt something stir inside her. As she scanned the room, her eyes caught a figure she thought she knew. It couldn't be, she told herself. Not after all these years. But when his eyes finally met hers, the world seemed to fall away. It was him. Daniel. Neither moved for several seconds. The crowd clapped politely at her words, but both were lost in a silence only they understood. After the event, Sarah found herself wandering nervously near the exit, as if her heart was guiding her toward him. And then, he was there, standing just a few feet away, with that same gentle smile she remembered so well. "Sarah," he said softly, almost as if testing whether the moment was real. "Daniel," her voice broke, but her eyes glistened with emotion she couldn't hide. What followed wasn't a dramatic reunion filled with speeches or grand gestures. Instead, it was simple, raw, and real. A long silence, 1,000 unsaid words, and a shared glance that spoke louder than any apology ever could. In that moment, time folded in on itself. They were no longer strangers shaped by years of distance, but two souls who had always been waiting for this day. Fate, it seemed, had finally kept its promise. The reunion was magical, but reality was quick to follow. After the event, Sarah and Daniel agreed to meet for coffee. At first, the conversation was light, old memories, familiar jokes, and the comfort of being in each other's presence again. But as the hours passed, the unspoken truths began to surface. Sarah had built a life far away from her hometown. Her career was demanding, pulling her from city to city, with little room for personal commitments. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and walking away from it felt impossible. Daniel's reality was different but no less complicated. His family still depended on him. His mother's health was fragile, and his younger siblings looked to him for support. He couldn't just leave them behind to chase happiness, no matter how much his heart longed to. And then there was the fear of being hurt again. They had once believed love could conquer everything, but the weight of life had proven otherwise. What if history repeated itself? What if they found themselves standing at the same painful crossroads? Sarah looked at him across the table, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "We're not the same people we used to be, Daniel," she said quietly. He nodded, his gaze steady but filled with unspoken emotion. "No, we're not. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we needed to grow apart to understand what really matters." His words touched her, but doubts lingered. She had responsibilities. So did he. Love, once again, was caught between dreams and duty. Still, there was something undeniable in the way their hearts reacted when they were together. Every glance, every laugh, every silence reminded them of what they once had and what they could still have, if only they were brave enough to try again. As they walked out of the cafe, Daniel offered her his jacket when the night breeze turned cold. It was such a simple gesture, yet it reminded Sarah of all the reasons she had fallen for him in the first place. Despite the challenges, the spark between them was alive, flickering like a flame refusing to die. But love is never just about feelings, it's about choices. And soon, both would have to decide, were they willing to fight for a second chance, or would they let life pull them apart once more? In the days that followed, Sarah and Daniel found themselves meeting more often. Sometimes it was for coffee, sometimes for long walks in the park, and sometimes just for the comfort of sitting in silence together. The more time they spent, the clearer it became, the love they once shared had never truly left. But love alone wasn't enough. They both knew it. There were still responsibilities, fears, and practical realities standing in their way. Sarah's career demanded her presence in the city, while Daniel's life was rooted in the quiet town where his family needed him. Every time they talked about the future, the same question returned: could they bridge the distance this time? One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Sarah and Daniel stood at the old park where they had once carved their initials into a wooden bench. The years had weathered it, but the mark was still there, a reminder that some things endure. "Maybe we don't have to figure everything out right now," Sarah whispered, her eyes soft with hope. "Maybe we just need to take one step at a time." Daniel smiled, reaching for her hand. "I don't want to lose you again, Sarah. Not now, not ever. Whatever it takes, I'll make it work." His words weren't grand promises of a perfect future. They were simple, grounded, and real, exactly what she needed to hear. From that moment, they chose courage over fear. Sarah began exploring ways to work remotely, giving her the flexibility to spend more time in her hometown. Daniel, too, started sharing his responsibilities with his siblings, realizing that he didn't always have to carry the weight alone. It wasn't easy. There were sacrifices, adjustments, and moments of doubt. But every challenge they faced only reminded them why love was worth fighting for. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, a new rhythm formed. Sarah and Daniel weren't the same people who had once let go. They were stronger, wiser, and more determined to hold on this time. Their story was no longer about a love lost, it was about a love found again. A love that survived distance, time, and trials. As they stood hand in hand, watching the stars scatter across the night sky, Daniel whispered, "This time, it's not the end, Sarah, it's our beginning." And with that, they stepped forward into a future not defined by fear or circumstance, but by the choice to write their ever after together.